April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. The oxygen mask could not hide Oberleutnant Ralph Hermichin's smirk as he peered through the crystal canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. Below, ungainly silhouettes lumbered upward, heavy, unfamiliar, and almost comical. "Die Armee has sent us flying milk bottles," he said over the radio, laughter trailing into the static. 16 American P-47C Thunderbolts were struggling for altitude, their giant engines straining under the weight of 7 tons of steel and fuel. To men who had spent years dancing in Spitfires and Messerschmitts, the newcomers looked absurd. Barrel-shaped, glass-topped, propellers like barn doors. No one circling above could have known they were witnessing the arrival of the machine that would one day destroy the Luftwaffe's pride. One bullet stream, one explosion, one shattered wing at a time. Within 18 months, those flying milk bottles would become the sound of fear. 8 Browning .50 caliber guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, and a thunderous heart that could tear a fighter apart in seconds. That morning, Major Donald Blakesley, once a Spitfire pilot, now leading the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation. He knew what his men did not yet understand. In the P-47, survival would not come from turning tighter or climbing faster. It would come from reimagining air combat itself. The Thunderbolt was not built for elegance. It was built for endurance. A high-altitude juggernaut born from American factories, and fear turned into engineering. The P-47 story began in panic, June 1940, when France fell and German fighters ruled the sky. At Republic Aviation, a Georgian-born designer named Alexander Kartveli was handed a desperate brief: build something that could meet the Luftwaffe head-on. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli said, looking over his plans, "but a dinosaur with good proportions." When the prototype first flew on May 6, 1941, no one believed what they saw. It weighed nearly 10,000 pounds empty, 2/3 more than its predecessor. The fuselage bulged with a turbo supercharger, its ducts winding through the rear like veins. "Does this thing even fly?" the test pilots asked. It did, and at altitude, it flew like nothing else alive. That enormous Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, breathed with a force that made the air itself seem heavier. While German engines gasped for oxygen, the P-47 thundered upward. Full power even at 27,000 feet. But mastering it came at a cost. At Bridgeport, Connecticut, Major Hubert Zemke's 56th Fighter Group lost 18 pilots in training. The Thunderbolt could kill a man before he ever met the enemy. Torque rolling on takeoff, diving past the limits of control, locking its own wings in compressibility. Yet those who learned its moods found themselves flying something almost alive. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, remembered his first flight. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." The first months of combat were cruel. German pilots mocked the P-47 as a truck pretending to fight. Their 190s and 109s outturned, outclimbed, outdanced it. The Americans lost 14 aircraft in their first month and scored only 3 kills. Even British allies smirked, saying the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run. But something else was happening, quietly, invisibly, in those first dogfights. When a Thunderbolt went down, it did so only after enduring punishment that would have torn any Spitfire to pieces. One aircraft returned from France with 21 cannon holes and 100 machine gun strikes, still flying. And when a P-47's guns found their mark, the effect was apocalyptic. 30 seconds of sustained fire, 6,000 rounds a minute, a wall of lead no human could fly through. June 26, 1943, over Lisieux, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, 61st Fighter Squadron, was returning from bomber escort when 16 Focke-Wulfs dove from the sun. Cannon shells burst across his cockpit. The canopy shattered. The engine cowling ripped away. Fire and blood and smoke filled the air. A shell jammed the canopy shut. He couldn't bail out. At 27,000 feet, trapped in a burning machine, he prayed. But the P-47 refused to die. Blinded by oil, Johnson leveled his crippled fighter and turned for England. Then, impossibly, another German found him, a lone Focke-Wulf 190. The enemy opened fire again. 4 cannon, 2 machine guns, raking him from tail to wingtip. When the guns fell silent, the German pulled alongside, staring. The American was still flying. He saluted and flew away. Johnson landed in England on a dead engine. 200 holes in his aircraft. The mechanics stopped counting. That wrecked P-47 became a legend. The Germans called it impossible. The Americans called it proof. It had taken everything the Luftwaffe could give, and brought its pilot home. By July 1943, the laughter in German cockpits had begun to fade. American pilots were learning, painfully, but fast. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke drilled one rule into his men. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The P-47's mass became its weapon. In a dive, nothing on Earth could catch it. From 30,000 feet, it could plunge past 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter alive. Captain Walker, Bud Mahurin, perfected a new kind of combat, the boom and zoom. His Thunderbolts would circle high, waiting for the Germans below. Then, inverted, they would fall, straight from the heavens. In that single screaming descent, the sky erupted in thunder. Survivors said facing a diving Thunderbolt was like standing before a waterfall of fire. At the bottom of those dives, the 8 Brownings spoke, and when they did, the air filled with the sound of tearing metal, the sound German pilots learned to fear. August 17, 1943. The mission to Schweinfurt and Regensburg. It was the deepest daylight raid yet into Germany, and it would reveal the Thunderbolt's true purpose. Major David Schilling led 4 P-47s against a formation of Messerschmitt 110s, twin-engine destroyers built to kill bombers. The Americans dove from 28,000 feet, sunlight flashing off their silver wings. German gunner Hinrich Roth later told interrogators, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I hit one. It didn't even wobble. Then it fired, and the aircraft ahead of me simply ceased to exist. In less than a minute, 18 German planes were gone. The sky was quiet again, except for falling wreckage. Each P-47 carried over 900 pounds of 50 caliber ammunition, enough to turn air into lead. At 300 yards, all 8 guns converged into a 6-foot circle of destruction. Anything inside it didn't burn. It vanished. Francis Gaby Gabreski, the top American ace in Europe, once said, "When you hit them with all 8, they don't go down. They explode." By autumn, German pilots were learning that the higher they climbed, the worse it got. The Thunderbolt thrived where others choked. October 8, 1943, 28,000 feet over Bremen. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most decorated aces, led his Focke-Wulfs toward a bomber stream. But the thin air strangled his engine. His fighter felt sluggish, slow to climb, slow to turn. Then, out of the blue void above, the Thunderbolts came. Robert Johnson, the same farm boy who had limped home riddled with holes months before, saw Philip's distinctive fighter below him. He opened fire at 300 yards. The German ace's aircraft exploded mid-air. No parachute was seen. The death of Hans Philipp sent a tremor through the Luftwaffe. If he couldn't survive, who could? By November, the German High Command had their answer. The report on the American Thunderbolt described it plainly. Unsurvivable in direct engagement. January 1944. The P-47D-22 arrived in England. Its new paddle blade propeller bit the air like a scythe, dragging the heavy fighter skyward with startling force. Pilots felt the change instantly, from sluggish climb to raw power. Heinz Knoke, a German ace, wrote in his diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. They followed us into the clouds. We laughed no more." The new propeller changed more than performance. It changed sound. That deep, rolling growl echoing across the fields of France became infamous. Ground troops could tell a thunderbolt by ear. That heavy, supersonic hum that meant only one thing: thunder was coming. They called it Donnerschlag, the thunderclap. By March 1944, the P-47 had grown long legs. 2 external fuel tanks gave it a range of over 1,000 miles. Now it could escort bombers all the way into Germany and still fight its way home. The Luftwaffe had no answer. Major Günther Rall, one of Germany's most respected aces, met them near Hanover that March. He remembered seeing their shapes against the sun. "Fat silhouettes," he said. Someone laughed and called them flying pigs. 30 seconds later, 3 of our fighters were gone. The Thunderbolts dove like stones, firing not in bursts, but in rivers of light. Getting caught in that stream, Rall said later, meant instant death. They were relentless. While German engines burned fuel like firewood, the American radials cruised high and steady, waiting, circling. For the first time, the Luftwaffe was hunted. By spring, a new role awaited. The Thunderbolt, born for the sky, turned its fury toward the earth. April 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France, the P-47 became something new: a flying hammer. Its 8 guns tore through tanks and trucks. 2 1,000-pound bombs hung beneath its wings, and 10 rockets waited like silent promises. German soldiers called them Jabos, fighter bombers. But the name didn't fit. These were not fighters, not bombers. They were flying artillery. Hans von Luck, a panzer commander in Normandy, saw it firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see their faces. The sound was like judgment. A column of trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles turned to fire in one pass. The men on the ground began to dread that sound more than the shelling of artillery, because thunder came without warning and left only silence behind. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The dawn sky above Normandy was layered with cloud and fear, and through that gray morning air came the roar of 500 P-47 Thunderbolts. They flew in overlapping tiers, from sea level to 30,000 feet, forming a wall of power above the Allied beachheads. Every German pilot who tried to break through met the same fate: a streak of flame, a column of smoke, and silence. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II was one of only 3 Luftwaffe pilots to reach the beaches that day. He later said, "The sky belonged to the Americans. We tried at dawn, 12 fighters from our group. I was the only one who returned." Below, the invasion rolled on, protected by an iron canopy of sound. The Thunderbolts circled like sentinels, their guns flashing white through the fog, their engines shaking the sea. By nightfall, the Luftwaffe was gone from Normandy's skies. In the weeks that followed, the P-47 became the single most feared weapon of the German army. It hunted by daylight, scouring every road, every bridge, every convoy. The statistics were staggering: 651 locomotives destroyed in June alone, nearly 4,000 trucks, 500 tanks, thousands of horse-drawn wagons burned to cinders. The Wehrmacht learned to move only at night. Even then, fear followed them. Because the Thunderbolt could appear without warning, low, fast, invisible, until the very last second. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into the sky, trying to catch shadows, but nothing could stop the thunder. Meanwhile, on the far side of the world, another storm was building. In the Pacific, the same machine that had dominated Europe was proving its worth against a very different enemy. The 348th Fighter Group under Colonel Neil Kirby flew from the jungles of New Guinea. Long distances, brutal heat, endless sea. On October 11, 1943, Kirby led 4 Thunderbolts against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak. They shot down 6 before the fight was done. For that, he received the Medal of Honor. The Japanese, masters of nimble aerial combat, were stunned. Their light Zero fighters, built for agility, were no match for the P-47's strength. Ace Saburo Sakai later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our cannon shells seemed useless. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt. It flew away. Their return fire tore planes apart like paper." To fight across the Pacific, the P-47 evolved once more. The P-47N, longer wings, bigger tanks, could fly over 2,000 miles without refueling. It became the long-range escort for B-29 bombers striking Japan. The short-legged ridiculed fighter of 1943 had grown into a giant that could cross oceans. Then came a new threat, the German jet. The Messerschmitt, Me-262, sleek and silver, could reach 540 miles an hour. To most, it seemed untouchable. But the Thunderbolt pilots learned patience. They waited near airfields, catching jets as they took off or landed, when speed could no longer save them. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group dove from 28,000 feet, reaching nearly 500 miles per hour. The jet below never saw him coming. At 400 yards, Meyer opened fire. His report was brief. Enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Pilot did not escape. The 8 guns of the P-47 had done it again. By 1945, the ultimate variant appeared, the P-47M. Water injection systems boosted power to 2,800 horsepower. In level flight, it could reach 470 miles an hour, faster than any Allied propeller-driven fighter in history. Major George Bostwick led the 63rd Fighter Squadron that spring. He shot down 2 Me-262s in a single month. "The jets are faster," he wrote, "but they can't take punishment. One good burst from our guns, and they come apart like they're made of glass." January 1, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte. Germany's desperate gamble to destroy the Allied Air Force on the ground. 900 German fighters launched at dawn, striking airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. At Y-34 near Metz, the 365th Fighter Group's Thunderbolts burned in their revetments. 22 destroyed before anyone could react. A captured German pilot, grinning, pointed to the smoking ruins. "What do you think of that?" he asked. Major George Brooking pointed toward the runway, where crews were already clearing debris. "By tomorrow," he said, "we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" Within 2 days, brand new Thunderbolts stood ready. Germany lost 271 aircraft that morning, and over 200 irreplaceable men. It was the last great battle of the Luftwaffe, and the beginning of its end. By the final winter of the war, numbers told the story better than words ever could. Republic Aviation had built over 15,000 Thunderbolts, more than any other American fighter. At Farmingdale, New York, a new P-47 rolled off the line every hour, day and night. In Indiana, the Evansville plant rose from empty farmland to turn out 500 aircraft a month. Each one required 65,000 parts, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, 8 miles of wiring. The engines alone, 2,400 components, each machine to the width of a human hair, were miracles of precision. And they were built by hands that, just a few years earlier, had never touched an airplane at all. Women and young men who had come from farms and cities, now assembling thunder from steel and sweat. Ammunition poured from American factories and rivers. Each Thunderbolt sortie consumed 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. By mid-1944, over 10 million rounds a month were being fired across Europe. At the Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, machines ran day and night, 30 million rounds every month, each cartridge exact to a 10,000th of an inch. Fuel flowed in equal measure. Every Thunderbolt drank 100 gallons an hour, 3 times that in combat. 25 million gallons a month crossed the Atlantic to feed the sky. This was more than aviation. It was the sound of an entire nation at full power, and behind every aircraft stood a pilot, young, trained, and ready. By 1944, America was producing 30,000 new pilots each year. Each one had hundreds of hours in the air before he ever saw combat. They learned formation, navigation, deflection shooting. They studied the enemy's tactics, their aircraft, their weaknesses. German pilots, starved of fuel and time, entered battle with barely 100 hours total. By the war's end, some had less than 30. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, fresh from training, remembered arriving in England. "I had over 400 hours in my logbook, 75 in the Thunderbolt. I'd fired at towed targets, studied film from real fights. My first mission, I knew what to do. The man I fought couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't fair, but then nothing in war is." By spring 1945, the laughter that once greeted the Thunderbolt had long since died. Joseph "Pips" Priller, the same German ace who had mocked the P-47 as a pregnant cow, spoke to German radio in the final months. His words were never broadcast. They were too honest. "The Thunderbolt," he said, "is the best fighter-bomber ever built. Its firepower never fails. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fights like a fighter, and survives like a tank. But it's not the machine. It's what it represents. Unlimited American production. They lose 10, they build 20. We lose 1, and it's gone forever. We laughed in 1943. We're not laughing now." He paused, then added quietly, "When you hear those guns, you know death has come calling." By April 1945, the Luftwaffe was little more than a rumor in the sky. Fuel was gone, airfields cratered. New pilots were boys, many who had never fired their guns before combat. One of them, Feldwebel Klaus Brechtender, flew his first and last mission over Leipzig that month. "I saw them diving, 4 Thunderbolts. I tried to turn. They fired once. My aircraft exploded. I lived because I was thrown clear. When I opened my parachute, I saw 6 of ours burning below. 12 seconds. That's all it took." The effect was no longer just military. It was psychological. German pilots began to tremble before takeoff. Doctors called it Jabo fever, nerves, exhaustion, fear. Even veterans who had faced hurricanes and Spitfires without hesitation became sick at the sound of those heavy engines. And on the ground, soldiers froze when the thunder rolled. They dropped to their bellies, praying for silence, because silence was the only thing louder than those guns. By the end of the war, the Thunderbolt's record defied imagination. In Europe alone, it destroyed over 3,700 enemy aircraft in the air, 3,300 on the ground, 9,000 locomotives, and nearly 70,000 trucks. In the Pacific, it claimed hundreds more: aircraft, ships, and convoys. The 9th Air Force flew more than 200,000 combat missions in P-47s, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, and fired 135 million rounds of ammunition. They achieved a 4.6 to 1 kill ratio, and held the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter-bomber. Behind those numbers were faces, thousands of young men who lived and died inside the sound of thunder. When the war finally ended, the skies over Europe were silent. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of nations, existed only on paper. Its airfields lay shattered, its pilots gone. Captured records from the German intelligence office at Oberursel told the story of that defeat, not in speeches, but in reports. Each update on the P-47 read like a slow surrender. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter, minimal threat. December 1943. Extreme structural strength, significant threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Dominant fighter-bomber, critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter-bomber of the war, unserviceable to engage directly. That was the arc of the Thunderbolt, from ridicule to reverence, from a joke in the clouds to the sound of unstoppable power. 40 years later, in 1985, former enemies met again, this time in the quiet warmth of Phoenix, Arizona. Old hands shook. Laughter returned, this time without bitterness. Adolf Galland, once commander of Germany's fighter arm, was asked what he thought of the P-47. He smiled, an old man remembering the sound of those guns. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943, he said. "We saw this big, heavy fighter and laughed. We thought the Americans had built a bomber and called it a fighter. But they understood something we did not. They built an American airplane, not a European one. Built for power, for production, for survival. When I flew a captured P-47 after the war, I finally understood. The power was endless. It climbed as if it were falling upward. The cockpit was clear and wide. The armor strong. It was a pilot's machine wrapped in steel. And then I thought, they built 15,000 of these while fighting 2 wars. That's when I knew. We never had a chance." He paused, his voice turning softer. "We called its guns Roosevelt's piano, because when they fired, they played a tune you never forgot." The P-47 Thunderbolt was not elegant, not graceful, not refined. It was something far more American, strong, loud, and utterly reliable. A brute force answer to a world gone mad. Every inch of its body told the story of a country that believed in building bigger, tougher, and faster than anyone else. Wing spars 3 times stronger than they needed to be. Engines that could run half dead and still bring a man home. Control cables doubled, ammunition feeds electrified. Guns heated to keep firing through the cold, thin air of 40,000 feet. Each detail reflected a nation's philosophy. If something was worth doing, it was worth overdoing, and making sure it never failed. Even after the war, some still said the P-47 won through numbers, not quality. But the record said otherwise. When numbers were even, when odds were fair, the Thunderbolt still prevailed. Its 8 Brownings fired not in hope, but in probability. A storm of bullets that made aim almost unnecessary. 2 seconds of fire could cut a fighter in half. The delayed fuse incendiary rounds burned so hot they melted steel, ignited fuel, and tore through armor that cannon shells sometimes only dented. It was not just a machine. It was a statement that America would build not only to fight, but to endure. Today, a restored P-47D stands in quiet dignity at the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Polished aluminum, broad wings, 8 silent gun barrels. Its placard lists numbers, speed, range, ceiling, victories. But nearby, in a small glass case, lie the real relics, spent shells, fragments of film from a gun camera showing a Focke-Wulf breaking apart in midair. Below them, a quote from a captured German pilot reads, "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn or climb. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to. They just pointed those guns at you, and you ceased to exist." The laughter ended in the smoke of 1945. The thunder rolled across the sky, and when it was gone, the silence that followed belonged to America.